Okay, hello again to everyone in the audience, and this is our next session on Through the Keyhole Around the Nations. So I am going to welcome the chair for this session, which is Rob Collins. Rob is our Director of Policy and Science, as well as being the chair of the catchment-based approach. So he's not only very well equipped to lead this session for us, but I think he'll be pleased at the mentions of the catchment-based approach in that opening session. Hi, Rob.
Hi, thanks, Becca, and good morning all. So yes, I'm Rob Collins. I'll be chairing this session, which is entitled Through the Keyhole. We have we'll be hearing from presenters from each of the respective nations about their experience implementing river buffer projects and the challenges and opportunities associated with that. So we have a really tight agenda, actually. So we've got 5 presentations, each no more than 7-8 minutes. But this is quite a densely packed part of the agenda. So I'll be planning to try and make time for one question, I think, per presenter, but I don't think we'll have time for any more than that. So we'll move swiftly on. We're here, first of all, from Scotland and from Rachel Smillie, who is project manager at Forth Rivers Trust. So over to you, Rachel.
Hi everyone, just hoping that you can see that presentation. Yeah, my name is, can you see that okay, yeah?
Yes, Rachel.
Okay, thank you. So yeah, welcome to my presentation on what can river buffers deliver in Scotland. I'm Rachel Smillie and I work for the Forth Rivers Trust, an organisation that engages people with rivers and wildlife while conserving rivers and their important species for future generations. I'm going to give a quick overview of how we look at buffers in Scotland, the blockers to creation, and how we can remove those blockers to upscale buffers. In Scotland, we have excellent, well-developed knowledge exchange resources on buffers that outline the regulations, latest research, and how to maximise ecosystem services by going beyond the regulated buffer distances. Farming and Water Scotland do an excellent job of helping farmers and land managers keep on the right side of diffuse pollution regulations. And Scotland's Farm Advisory Service also produces a range of resources that advocate for the different types of buffers for different types of land. We also have excellent data resources that help decision making when it comes to buffers, such as maps that highlight where trees are best planted on buffers to cool down rivers. We also have amazing place-based groups that work on a catchment scale with engaged farmers, landowners, and communities to improve rivers and various land management and river restoration methods. Now, this is not a full list, so apologies if I've missed some people. Feel free to get in touch and I can add you to this slide if I do this again. Although we have these great resources to guide and provide knowledge on the benefits of enhanced buffer design, it doesn't automatically result in better buffers on land. The first blocker that exists in creating better buffers is a lack of targeted design. The current design of regulated buffers of just grassy strips can become saturated and no longer fit for purpose. They need to be designed and integrated to local contexts and pressures. The second barrier is that there is a lack of water-based ecosystem service markets in Scotland. We don't have a market that can pay farmers and land managers to provide the multiple benefits that an enhanced buffer can provide. Therefore, it's reliant on shorter-term competitive public funding streams and grants and limits how we are enhancing buffers. And finally, linked to the second barrier, there are no widely adopted monitoring, reporting and verification frameworks to demonstrate the benefits of creating better buffers. If we want to pay a farmer to enhance a buffer for water quality or quantity, how do we know that the actions that they are taking are effective? So how do we break down these buffers and scale up in Scotland? For the first hurdle of not having a kind of bespoke design, 3D buffers can be the answer. The concept was developed by Mark Stutter and Mark Wilkinson at James Hutton Institute in Aberdeen. And 3D buffers are an integrated approach and can intercept pollution pathways in 3 dimensions. So like subsurface flows, surface flows, and then airborne, while also providing a wide range of other ecosystem services. They recognise whether field, farm or catchment scale buffers need to be bespoke and designed to address site-specific problems, pressures, local conditions, and they also need to align with the existing land management plans of the farmers and land managers. Through utilising the vertical space, 3D buffers can limit the land take, and by stacking different types of ecosystem service delivery, the land managers can then access a wider range of ecosystem service markets. However, the valuation of water-based ecosystem markets was the second barrier identified. And work is currently being undertaken in Scotland to remove this barrier. Nature Scot has a corporate priority to increase value in nature to attract other types of finance. And funding is also available to help identify how to develop markets through funds. This funding stream is from the Scottish Government and Nature Scot, working in partnership with the National Lottery Heritage Fund and the support of the Green Finance Institute to support projects that shape and grow the private finance and market-based mechanisms to finance the restoration of Scotland's nature. Scotland is also utilising existing robust ecosystem market models, including LENS, developed by Keyhole. LENS is a well-established approach to developing integrated place-based marketplaces for ecosystem functions and creates local trading networks for ecosystem service delivery. The Forth Rivers Trust are piloting the first LENS in Scotland in the Leven region, and it will match investors with local activities and projects that preserve and enhance the Leven catchment's natural assets, and that will include buffers. And it aims to make Leven landscape healthy and productive, while benefiting the environment, boosting biodiversity and uplifting local communities. The third barrier identified in scaling up buffers in Scotland is a lack of MRV. However, like targeted buffers and water-based ecosystem service markets, there is also progress in Scotland, and that is aiming to remove the barrier to upscaling buffers. These include Nature Scot actively involved in developing the Woodland Water Code for markets, which is anticipated in 2025. Credit Nature are workshopping a Living Rivers Index, scoring the biodiversity values of waterways. And Scotland is also anticipated to use a tweaked version of the DEFRA to baseline and measure habitats, including riparian zones. Taking the baseline of a buffer quality and quantity can therefore act as a proxy for the ecosystem services it's delivering. So although there are barriers in place to implementing better buffers in Scotland, we are well on the way to minimising them. So river buffers in Scotland should be thought as a key natural capital asset to agricultural businesses, their supply chains, catchment stakeholders and wider communities. In summary, extensive knowledge exists in Scotland about the benefits of buffers, and there is scope to deliver better buffers through the existing partnerships and engaged land managers and farmers in Scotland. We just need to keep working on a few things. So thanks for listening. If you want to get in touch, find out more about anything, emails on the screen, or get in touch with Forth River Trust on the socials. Thank you.
Thanks, Rachel. Really excellent. I just have one quick question for you. I'm just checking the Q&A, but one very quick question. When do you feel that landowners and farmers in Scotland are beginning to recognise the value in monetising ecosystem services and why it's of benefit to them or could be of benefit to them? Do you feel that there's a sort of steady progression, or is that really something still hard to crack?
No, definitely there is interest from farmers and land managers in Scotland. It's just that missing part of how they get paid for the services, because they are well aware of the benefits that they can provide. It's just that disconnect from getting the whole financial metric there to make sure that they're getting the proper payments for what they're delivering.
Yeah. Okay. Thanks very much. As I mentioned, we are very tight for time, so we'll move on very quickly. For the English perspective from Anna Holliday, who's Farming and Conservation Officer at Eden Rivers Trust. Over to you, Anna.
Thanks, Rob. 2 seconds. Thank you for the introduction, Rob. Yes, so I'm here to talk about the aspirations and blockers of river buffers in England. So my name's Anna Holliday and I'm the Farming and Conservation Officer at Eden Rivers Trust. We cover the Eden catchment in North Cumbria. Our catchment includes Ullswater, Haweswater and flows through Carlisle. Most of our catchment is rural agricultural areas between the Pennines and the Lakeland Fells. There are many ecosystem benefits and services that arise from river buffers. An example of reducing pollution entering the water, reducing pollution entering the watercourse. River buffers have the potential to trap nutrients bound to sediment in surface runoff. These nutrients can then be sequestered in the buffer zone and are available for root uptake. River buffers also help to slow the flow. Amidst climate change where flood mitigation has never been so vital, the roughness of river buffers can help to slow the flow of water into our watercourses and so reduce downstream flooding. They also bring benefits and well-being for people. Evidence suggests that waterscapes can be more beneficial in psychological and mental health than green spaces. Therefore, we should be making the most of these habitats. These benefits are also affected by both river buffer width and vegetation type. We need buffers to be appropriately positioned, designed, created and managed to mitigate against our targeted issues. Considering the hydrology and geomorphology of the catchment and the specific issue at hand is key to delivering effective buffers in our landscapes. As climate change exacerbates, the rivers are predicted to become more active. This means that we need to make more space for them to move, meander and spill out or risk more flooding and erosion. It is inefficient of our country's resources to fence less than 15 metres away from the watercourse. By fencing further away from the river, we are future-proofing our farming systems. River buffers need to be thought of as a resource for storing water and becoming an additional funding stream. A study conducted in Norfolk last year concluded that the highest total removal rates of phosphorus are typically only achieved in buffer strips 15 to 20 metres wide. This means that the current countryside stewardship option in England to create buffer strips 4 to 12 metres wide is misguided funding. Although our insight into river buffer effectiveness is changing, most of us can agree that river buffers are good. We simply need to do better. There are a few examples where funding in England is misdirected. As I mentioned before, the CS, you'll be paid for creating a river buffer between 4 and 12 metres wide. This can be wider, but you won't be paid for it. Within the England Woodland Creation Offer by Forestry England, the Keeping Rivers Cool payment only focuses on the shading aspect. So if the watercourse is already shaded, you won't be rewarded for creating a river buffer. We are in a period where past agreements with landowners have expired and there isn't any maintenance funding. So now we risk losing the buffer entirely. Another blocker is that the most current agri-environment scheme funding doesn't outcompete the financial gain for conventionally farming the land. We've known in conservation and farming for some time that one size does not fit all. What will work in the small fields of the Eden catchment in Cumbria won't necessarily suit the extensive arable fields of Lincolnshire. We need to incorporate even more flexibility and adaptability into our funding and delivery. Furthermore, there is a lack of government funding for the Environment Agency enforcement staff, which has led to an inability to regulate the farming rules for water. There is also a social misconception within our community. It is generally seen as an additional benefit rather than a necessity to fence off the watercourse and to create a river buffer. For healthy rivers and all the associated benefits, 20-metre river buffers need to be widespread across England. This isn't taking land away from food production, but rather creating an alternative funding stream and future-proofing our farming system. One of my own case studies through the Woodlands for Water project is Redbeck at Gilsland near Hadrian's Wall. This is a 3.7 hectare site that is going into natural colonisation along the River Irthing, a SSSI and SEC watercourse. It will be funded by the England Woodland Creation Offer, a scheme that offers a riparian buffer payment that focuses on shading. However, as this watercourse already has some wooded habitat in other areas, it does not qualify for the payment. So this landowner will receive no additional payment for creating a river buffer along priority habitat. As you can see on the map, the site sits between a road at the top of the bank and priority watercourse at the bottom. So it's in an ideal location for trapping highway polluted runoff. Our aspirations for 20-metre plus river buffers, we at Eden Rivers Trust hope for farmers and landowners to become custodians of the riparian habitat. We want them to be paid to create and manage efficient and functional river buffer zones. We want river buffers to be valued for their multifunctional managed habitat. And we want seasonal permissive routes along our river buffers to link to rights of way and create a network along watercourses. We'd like to see carbon sinks to be created within our riparian habitats through trees and wetlands, and for DEFRA funding to be more strategically applied to deliver benefits. We need to encourage blended funding through green finance to support this delivery. Thank you very much. These are my references, and I've put my email on just in case you have more questions.
Thank you, Anna. There's actually a lot of food for thought there around policy and advocacy. I think you raised a lot of issues. I'm not noticing anything in the Q&A, so please add questions as you listen to these presentations. But a quick question for you, Anna. You mentioned the social misconception, and I wondered how you might go about tackling that, and whether you at Eden Rivers Trust sort of attempt to do that.
Yeah, Eden Rivers Trust has been running for 25 years now and has been delivering work with the farming community throughout that time, where we've been working with farmers to install river buffers. I myself, through the Woodlands Water project, currently help farmers to create river buffer habitats. But I think there's a change in the last few decades that has occurred where, 20 years ago, it was normal to be putting sort of 5-metre river buffers on both banks, whereas now we're seeing, as the research is being developed by the likes of the Horton Institute in Aberdeen, we're seeing that phosphates and nitrates are actually moving across these buffers they're generally moving sort of further than 13 metres. So what was installed 20 years ago, we're seeing actually needs to be more. It needs to be more of a 3D buffer, like Rachel was saying, that needs to be carefully designed and tailored to work above and below the ground. It needs to sort of intercept various pollution pathways and move away from this sort of linear design and be more of like a sculpted and diverse structure, including like a multitude of different features to capture various pollutants.
Yeah, actually, and on that, I noticed there's a question here from Sabina. Do you have any involvement in the development of local nature recovery schemes? And I guess what you're just saying there is the answer will be yes, really.
Yes, yeah, we are. We're currently involved in the East of Eden project. I'm not myself, but I have colleagues that are, and we're happy to answer more questions by email.
Yeah. Okay. Thanks very much, Anna.
Thank you.
Sorry, we will have to move on very quickly. Next up, Mark Horton, who's the All-Ireland Director for the Rivers Trust, but will be presenting the perspective today from Northern Ireland. Over to you, Mark.
Thank you, Rob, and good morning, everyone. Oh, I think I'm maybe sharing the wrong screen, am I? Just bear with me 1 second while I get the screen shared. Apologies. It's always the case, isn't it, that everything goes wrong when you don't want it to.
That's looking like it, Mark.
Sorry, my apologies, everyone. It doesn't seem to be, I think I need to switch the screen, actually. Doesn't seem to be sharing the right screen. Apologies, just bear with me 1 second while I get the right screen to share. There, is that right now?
That looks good. Yeah, thanks.
Okay, all right, sorry, apologies about that. Okay, so this talk is to give you the perspective of what's happening in Northern Ireland with buffers. First of all, I wanted to give you a brief overview of the situation in Northern Ireland with the water quality. So Northern Ireland is a predominantly agricultural landscape. 75% of our land is in agricultural use, and most of that, 93% of it is grassland. And I think a lot of people don't realise that Northern Ireland produces 5 times more food than is required for its population size. So we're an export in terms of agricultural production. And as a result of that, it places a lot of pressure on the land. And certainly the main sources of nutrient loss to water are from agriculture. And we see that phosphates in Northern Irish rivers are far more prevalent than nitrates. Now, that's not to say that nitrates are not a problem, but certainly phosphate make up the bigger percentage of nutrient in our watercourses. And there has been an increasing phosphate surplus in our soils and our rivers since around 2012, 2013. And that followed a period of decreasing phosphate in our soils, which is largely attributed to the implementation of the Nitrates Action Programme, but then steadily began to increase, we think because of increases in imported feed, and also in some increases in organic phosphate use on the land as well. And we can see that in the water concentrations of phosphates in our water bodies, with 39% of rivers in Northern Ireland having phosphate levels above that, which would be considered to be for good water quality. And it's not surprising when almost 40% of our soils have higher than required levels of phosphate in them. And that figure may well change as Northern Ireland rolls out what's known as the Soil Nutrient Health Scheme, where every single field in Northern Ireland is being sampled, so that we can better balance our nutrient on the land to protect watercourses. But we also have a high risk of runoff from our fields, with almost 60% of our soils classed as having a high risk. So it's very easy for phosphates to reach the water environment. Apologies, sorry. This problem manifests itself very well last summer in Lough Neagh, where we had a bloom of blue-green algae. It was so significant it reached the national press, and that blue-green algae actually reached our coastline and damaged our beaches and coastal waters. And this has raised the profile of the problem of water quality issues in Northern Ireland. And as we heard earlier on, the issue of water protection has never been higher on the public agenda. So the Rivers Trust is involved in a number of projects looking at reducing the amount of nutrient reaching watercourses. Historically, this has been done through the Environmental Farming Scheme in Northern Ireland, which is administered by the Department of Agriculture. and it's offered 5-year agreements through a wider and higher scheme to create buffers along rivers, which had no buffer, so just fencing and no buffer zone, 2-metre buffers and 10-metre buffers, which could either be not grazed or planted with trees. And not surprisingly, the uptake of the option of watercourse fencing with no buffer was far greater than 2- and 10-metre buffer strips. And this is largely because fields in Northern Ireland are relatively small. Farmers are very reluctant to give up land. And so having the option just to put a fence up with no buffer was favoured over giving up grassland for a buffer strip. So the department actually removed that in tranche 3 of the scheme, realising that it wasn't bringing about the desired outcomes. But there was a lot of questions around how effective buffers actually are in protecting the water environment. And that's where the Agri-Food and Biosciences Institute, Ulster University, the Rivers Trust and the department came together to look at implementing as many buffer strips as possible in 2 subcatchments that are monitored 24/7. And we've embedded research in that, looking at the effects of erosion control and the effects of buffer efficiency, which are being led or have been led by Alison Scott and Mael at AFBI. And this is giving us very valuable information on how impactful buffers can be in terms of protecting water quality. So for the Rivers Trust part in all of this, we are working with landowners in these subcatchments. We're providing non-regulatory farm advice, and we're supporting the landowners in identifying where buffers can be placed on their farm, as well as other water quality protection measures to bring about improved water quality. We've over 300 landowners now involved in the project, and we've invested just under 3 million in on-farm measures. A lot of that is on riparian fencing, livestock exclusion, and the creation of buffer zones. But it's also about informing landowners about the importance of having these buffer zones on their farms. So we're running demonstration events and peer-to-peer learning events. And we've also partnered now with the Woodland Trust to look at integrating as much tree planting as possible into buffer zones and creating larger buffers along rivers here in Northern Ireland. Alongside this, Ballinderry Rivers Trust and the River Blackwater Catchment Trust are also jointly developing and trialling results-based payment schemes, because there is a recognition that we're going to need to incentivise landowners to give up more land to buffers, so that we can generate those larger strips of land that we've heard spoken about in previous talks. And those incentives are not there at the minute, so it's very hard to convince farmers to create these buffers that we require. So just some early findings from the work that we've been doing here in Northern Ireland on the effectiveness of buffers. The monitoring programme that's going on 24/7, where we've concentrated our efforts to create buffers in 2 small subcatchments, that's ongoing. The data is still being analysed, but certainly the early indications show that there's a reduction in sediment and nutrient, and the reports on that will follow. In terms of livestock exclusion, there were some high resolution spatial assessments done on cattle erosion points around rivers, and also looking at the amount of sediments that are lost and total phosphates that are lost from that, compared to fenced to unfenced. And when the findings of that research were scaled up to take account of all the fencing that has been done and all the buffers that have been created through the environmental farming scheme in Northern Ireland over a 6-year period, it basically estimated that up to 9,999 tonnes of sediment per year have probably been prevented from reaching Northern Ireland's rivers, and upwards of 4,000 kilograms per year of total phosphorus getting into Northern Ireland rivers as well. And research is ongoing now, looking at the efficiency of buffer zones as water and nutrient travel across those buffers. And we've heard in the previous talks how those buffers need to be as wide as possible in order to be effective. So, you know, the conclusion that we have from our work here in Northern Ireland is that buffer zones and riparian management is going to play a significant role in protecting our watercourses from sedimentation and nutrient. But one of the key messages we have is that these need to be incentivized, and they also need to be planned in conjunction with others, so farmers and the likes of Rivers Trust working together to create buffers that are win-win solutions for both the environment and the farming community. So that's it. Thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you, Mark. That was great. Just a comment, you'll see Becca's put in the chat there that actually we're going to be limited with time, and presenters in this session, if you can answer any of the Q&A, there's some general questions in there, please go ahead. Question for you, Mark. I think those numbers you quoted there, the quantification of the efficacy of the buffers, seem to me to be really critical. You know, if you want to attract private investment, if we want to understand the environmental improvements. How did you seem to have done very well here in attracting money to monitor? That strikes me as being quite unusual to get that sort of funding for a project like this. I just wonder if you could comment on that.
Yeah, so it's through a partnership that money has been pulled together. The department was required to provide evidence that all of the money invested through the agri-environmental schemes would bring about or would be expected to bring about a water quality benefit in Northern Ireland. And when kind of that question was put to the department, it and partners such as ourselves realised there wasn't actually a lot of evidence out there on how effective different buffers are. So that instigated a research project led by the Agri-Food and Biosciences Institute. And it's that partnership between AFBI and Ulster University and the Rivers Trust that has brought together the elements that have been required to go out and actually implement measures on the ground and monitor them at the same time. So that investment that's been made by the Northern Ireland government into research will hopefully feed into the new agri-environmental schemes and lever more funding and more incentivisation out for further buffer projects across the country.
Yeah, no, thank you. That seems really critical. Thanks very much to Mark. We'll again move on very quickly. We hear now from Constanze O'Toole, who's the Island Development Manager at the Rivers Trust. Constanze is currently at an Interreg project in Belgium, so we have her. We have a recorded video from her.
Thank you for the introduction. My name is Constanze O'Toole, and as you heard, I'm the Ireland Development Manager at the Rivers Trust, and I'm part of the Ireland team. Today I would like to talk about one of our projects, which is called Buffer Plus, and it's an Interreg Northwest Europe project. And I'm going to share my slide deck with you now, just a moment. Okay, here it is. So the full title of the project is Interreg Northwest Europe Buffer Plus, Water and Carbon in Peatlands, Landscape-Based Solutions for Climate Adaptation. And as you can see, it fits into the theme of this conference because buffering water and carbon is very important to this project. And we often describe it as we're working with a double buffer. And I just want to mention at the start that we do this project with the help of the Inishowen Rivers Trust and the River Moy. So at the start, I thought I'd say a few words about Interreg because maybe not all of you are familiar with the program. It's a European territorial cooperation program that aims to foster balanced development across the regions in Northwest Europe. And the program focuses on making all regions more resilient and contribution to the well-being and quality of life for Northwest European citizens. My apologies. Before I dive into it, I would like to talk a little bit, give you background and context about Irish peatlands, because this project aims at peatland restoration as part of one of the work packages. So Ireland is very lucky. We have a really large area of peat coverage. It's one of the largest in Europe, and we have 21% of the total landmass in Ireland is actually peatland. So this makes Irish peatlands really important in a global context. But however, I have to say that 82% of the Irish peatlands are degraded to some extent. What happens if a peatland is degraded? It releases carbon. That's one of the problems. And in relation to the water environment, it has negative impacts on water quality. And it creates unfavorable conditions for water-dependent habitats and species. And this is really important for trusts who work and care about the rivers and connected ecosystems. So drained and degraded peatlands, they release sediments into water, and the pH changes. So this is quite bad for the organisms and the systems themselves. And of course, when we look at the air now, degraded peatland release nitrous oxides and carbon dioxides, which we all know are greenhouse gases and drivers of climate change. So what is the double buffer? So the project aims to double buffer water and carbon in peatlands. And let's start with the water. So peatlands have fantastic capacity to buffer and store water in times of heavy rainfall. And that's important in this changing climate, where we have times where there's super heavy rainfall, which can cause flooding, but a healthy peatland can actually keep some of this excess rain and retain it. And this retained water is also really important when in the summer we start to go into drought conditions. So it releases water gradually and can kind of keep the water levels up in the rivers. So it's great for climate mitigation to have a healthy peatland connected to the water systems. Let's look at the carbon. A peatland that's drained releases carbon, so it's a carbon source. But if it's waterlogged and if it has a high water level, then it becomes a carbon sink. And instrumental to this is the quality of the moss of the sphagnums there. I don't want to go into much detail, and I think you know all about this as well. But what we try to do is get the peatlands from being carbon sources more to the other side, and I put a ring around it, to carbon sinks. The project itself. So Buffer Plus works on alternative land and water management, and we have 3 work packages. One looks at nature, and the heart of it is restoring peatlands, creating these healthy peatlands. Then we look at socio-economic opportunities. So this is to encourage private landowners to change the land use. And then we also involve and engage a wide range of stakeholders. So this is the governance part of the project. In Ireland, we have 3 pilots, and 2 of us are run by us, the Rivers Trust, with the help. I mentioned the River Moy Trust and the Inishowen Rivers Trust. Inishowen is at the northwest top of Ireland. And so what we hope to do is restore a peatland there that can also provide blue services. So it could be pre-filtration for drinking water, and it could also be used as natural flood management. There are problems with flooding in that region in Ireland. And then in the Midwest, the River Moy Trust, we are going to test paludiculture. So this is having a wet crop on a peatland. So this is to create an incentive and interest for landowners to restore the peatlands. And this is really interesting, but I don't want to leave out the second partner in Ireland, which is not the Rivers Trust, but it's the South Kerry Development Partnership. And they're also going to involve the community and restore peatland. We also have 2 cross-cutting pilots, biodiversity in Inishowen, and they will track the change in biodiversity for us using bees. And BioClear Earth is looking at the genome of the soil and tracking the soil health. So this is Buffer Plus in a nutshell. And what I would like to remember is just maybe there's a different type or a double buffer. So when you create a buffer, it can act in various ways. And a lot of the nature-based solutions we use to buffering for water quality also have an element of climate mitigation. So thank you very much. And thank you for the opportunity and listening to my talk. Thank you.
So thanks to Constanze there. She's obviously not around at the moment, so I'll save any questions. But just a comment, I think just how important that climate overlap is. And again, as with Mark's presentation, I think the importance of actually being able to monitor and quantify the carbon sequestration is critical to investment, whether that be public or private. But we'll move on to the final session of today. That's from Peter Powell, who's CEO of the Welsh D Trust. Over to you, Peter.
Hi everyone, I'll just share my screen. Hopefully that's working. So hi everybody, yeah, my name's Peter Powell. I'm the CEO of the Welsh D Trust. So the Welsh D Trust is the River Trust of the River Dee, which flows from North Wales, and 80% of our catchment is in North Wales, and we also just about touch into Cheshire, so 20% is in Cheshire. As an organisation, our objective really is a River Dee which is free of pollution and full of wildlife. We have a 5-year strategy which is full of actions that we are trying to implement on the ground to get towards our objective. And a key one for that is by 2027, we want to try and restore 40 kilometres of riparian habitat and buffer within the Dee catchment for a lot of the good reasons which we've heard about already as part of other people's talks. So on the ground, what does that look like? So this is one of our habitat restoration sites. Oop. Hit play. This is one of our habitat restoration sites. The River Dee, particularly in Wales, is largely very rural, very agricultural. It's largely livestock grazing and grass, particularly a lot of sheep. It is Wales. So mostly when we're talking about creating habitat buffers, it's around fencing livestock out of the area to allow the natural regeneration of the trees and the natural vegetation. So in our schemes, we will fence the river out. In this site, it's 20 metres from the watercourse, and then also plant a few trees to restart regeneration. And we also put in some scrapes and pools to create that sort of 3D buffer effect and create an interesting area for wildlife. There's sort of three main challenges that I was going to touch on for incorporating buffers into Wales. The first one is the cost. Fencing is expensive. It's very expensive. It costs us roughly £10 a metre to do fencing. So if you're doing large sites, that's quite a lot of money. The other one is historically and traditionally, all livestock drinks from watercourses. That is the sort of the standard approach for where drinking water is provided. So as part of that, we then also have to provide alternatives for drinking water. That largely means installing water troughs, and that's our main aim, attaching water to the mains or to rainwater harvesting from the farmyard. Again, this can be very expensive, approximately sort of £2,000 to £6,000 per farm, and per field even, and each farm might have sort of 2 or 3 fields that you need to provide drinking water to. So those 2 big initial costs are some of the biggest challenges for farms and for us as a Rivers Trust to install riparian buffers. And then the final one is lost output. So Wales, we are working with farm businesses. Farm businesses in Wales are smaller than elsewhere in the UK. I think the average size in Scotland is 107 hectares. In England, it's 88 hectares. And the average size of a farm in Wales is just 48 hectares. So they're much more reliant on each hectare of land within Wales to produce a farm business. Also, another challenge is 80% of the land in Wales is less favourable. This is basically because it's mountainous, steep land. And so actually the most productive bits of land on most farms are the floodplains, are the flat areas near rivers. So when we're talking about sort of taking land out of production to create river buffers, that it's already taking, potentially quite a large percentage of the farm out of production, but then also probably taking it out of the most productive and the most important part of the farm, and that can be a real challenge. That comes across in sort of two main ways. There's obviously the lost income for the farm. Farm businesses in Wales on average make less than most other farms in the UK. I think the average income for a farm in Wales is about £24,000 a year. So each pound of lost income is quite a big barrier for the farm putting in river buffers. But also in Wales, the farming industry is very much a sort of critical mass of agriculture that's required for everyone's farm businesses. They're very reliant on all of your neighbouring farm businesses also being in production and being successful through shared equipment, through shared ideas, through shared resources, just from helping each other when things go wrong. And so I think there's a real fear within agricultural business, and there's a real risk, I guess, that as land is taken out of production, you can hit a sort of a tipping point where suddenly it makes it much more difficult for each farm business to survive. So I think there's a perception that if you're taking land out of production, you are sort of disadvantaging the whole farming community in Wales, and that can be quite a big barrier. So I think the real challenge and the real thing that we need to do is trying to incorporate farming and profitable farm businesses and river buffers together, and that should hopefully make a big improvement. And a big part of that is going to be the future of agri-environment schemes, and also how we manage those farm buffers. So yeah, diolch. Thank you very much. Thank you for listening. Back to you, Rob.
Thank you, Peter. Thanks very much. A very quick question from me, because we're a little bit over time. You mentioned, well, you've set out really well there some of the sort of financial challenges and other challenges, and you mentioned at the very end there agri-environmental schemes. Do you think they're fit for purpose currently?
I mean, Wales in
specifically with buffers, that is, river buffers.
Yes, yeah. I mean, particularly I get to compare, because I look at buffers in both Wales and England, so I get to compare it. England with the agri-environment schemes is probably further ahead of what there is in Wales. We've just had a recent consultation on what is available in Wales. There is nothing particularly special in there for water or river buffers, which I think is a real lost opportunity, because buffers, if you're looking at ecosystem services, rivers, water quality, buffers is probably one of the most important areas you can look at. So there's nothing specific. Also, the Welsh farm scheme is a sort of all in or all out, whereas England, you can it's sort of pick and mix. You can choose what you want to do. So there's some very good, generous options for river buffers. Farms can just put in river buffers and not have to do anything else. In Wales, what's being proposed is more of you must do the whole suite of actions across the entire farm to get the funding, which makes it harder then to persuade people to do buffers, because they've also got to do 6 hours of online training. 10% of their farms got to be covered by trees, so there's other requirements as well. So yeah, it's challenging in Wales at the moment.
Yeah, some significant blockers still then.
Yeah, there is.
Yeah, thanks very much. I can feel the pressure to move on here. Becca's appeared, so thanks very much to all the speakers. Really interesting stuff, and I'll close the session there. Hand back to Becca.
Thanks, Rob, and thanks to all the speakers. Apologies for the going over by a few minutes on that session, but I think it was worthwhile just to get that whistle-stop tour of the UK and Ireland. And I appreciate that there's lots of questions in the chat, which we will keep a record of and have a look at after today. I'm now going to hop swiftly over to our next session on breaking down the barriers. So hopefully I will see all of you there in just a minute. Thank you.